I want to take a little bit of time here to do some review of the French Revolution, the guillotine, the timeline. It would also be helpful to pay attention to watching the supplemental and pay attention to the specific instructions of what we did in class for part one and part two of the Ed puzzle. Um, this you each had assigned questions. We went through some of them in class. I'll quickly review them here. You may want to stop at certain points. Let me take away my head here so that it becomes a little easier to be able to see. So first of all, on slide number 6, looking at some of these questions, what did the French Revolution um, do in terms of when the National Assembly was finally kicked out of the Estates General, leaving because they were being treated unfairly. Again, why was the tennis court the critical moment on the road to rebellion? They're finally saying they're kicked out to this cannonball court. They're finally going to say, "Hey, we're not going to be treated unfairly anymore. We're not going to deal with this. We're not going to disband until a new constitution is declared." The old tax collection system, where you're collecting a bunch of taxes, is void, and we're going to take action to help those facing food shortages. Louis gets wind of this. There's a rumor that he may try to attack, may try to counterattack the revolutionaries. So they storm the medieval prison fortress called the Bastille, and that's like the French Revolution's most significant day. It's their day of it's like their 4th of July. The Parisians stormed the Bastille, a prison fortress. No gunpowder. There was a rumor allegedly there was gunpowder there. There's no gunpowder, but it does challenge the existence of the king's regime. The idea is that first there's a constitution in 1791, and it brings power to the French government, which of these changes are reflected in the goals of the Enlightenment. So Louis's power now comes from the people, not divine right, setting up a constitutional monarchy with shared powers and a legislative branch, right? So he's forced into this signing the Declaration of Rights of Man, and this idea as well, setting up this constitutional monarchy. After he tries to escape to Austria, where Marie is aligned with him, there is a war potentially with Austria as the Austrians are trying to attack because they're fearful that if the French monarchy falls, so too will their monarchy. So the Jacobins fight against the Prussians and the Austrians to maintain against the Jacobins who want this monarchy eliminated now. And they're attacking murder prisoners who believe to be enemies of the revolution. So the National Convention is formed, which is this group headed by Robespierre, and they put Louis on trial for treason and eventually kill him via the guillotine. So this is, you might want to stop at certain points to get certain notes down as necessary. Um, Finally, what you have, so if you're looking, and I'll come back to the timeline. If we're looking at the timeline, you're up through. If we're looking at the timeline in particular, we're up through. Let me get my pen straightened out here. We're looking at the timeline in particular. We're up through the execution of Louis. So we're up through the execution of Louis in terms of the timeline, and this is where we are looking the Great Fear, the storming of the Bastille. This is July of 1789, and then the execution of Louis in January of 1793. So again, there's this committee of public safety that's formed after the Louis execution because the creation of Republican ideas keeps going, and they want to live in a dictator. They're going to live in a dictator-like state. Robespierre is essentially going to become a dictator, and when he does, this dictatorship is formed, and these people who might be considered enemies of the state are rounded up. But being enemies of the state is kind of a ridiculous thing. It could be someone who's whispering, hey, isn't it terrible how we lost the king? And they're like, oh, they'll go tell on you, and and you could be executed. 16,000 people between 1793 and 1794 were executed at the hands of the guillotine. Um, to cut the number of prisoners, execute enemies of the National Convention. But eventually, people get tired of Robespierre, his deaths aren't really justified. So the National Convention turns on Robespierre because these deaths just aren't justified. So what happens is we start looking. The Reign of Terror begins, and Marie's executed, and then finally Robespierre is executed, and we lead into Napoleon taking power. So that's what's going on here. Um, and then you have this particular idea of excuse me. Let's talk about. I was trying to keep my thing up here. And let's look at slide 9. Why the guillotine was such an effective tool. Well, the guillotine was such an effective tool because it was seen as very efficient, very humane. You're going to need to get a picture of the guillotine as you go along here. You're going to need to get a picture of the guillotine. And that picture can be any picture, it doesn't have to be this one, because it's seen as a more humane way to execute the thousands being against the revolution. Fair to all. The revolutionaries, believe it or not, were considering themselves more democratic and against the privileges the upper class once enjoyed. So if they're not using the king and queen's methods for, or, the medieval or other more crude methods for execution, this is much more efficient, even though the guillotine's not exactly a picnic. It's still, as you can see here, a pretty horrifying experience, but it's quick, it's efficient, as we can see, and they were justified it as being more humane and democratic. And if you look here, Marie, Louis, Robespierre are the main three that are killed at the hands of the among many hundreds of thousands of others executed for treason. She's accused of extravagant spending, even incest with her child, but she's not her children, and she vehemently denies that. But she's seen as a symbol of what's wrong with the monarchy. Louis, and like Marie, tries to escape his country, was captured and accused of treason. That was the spark. That was the catalyst. The underlying reason was the Jacobins felt they needed to get rid of the king in order to function. Robespierre takes over, but he just takes it too far with this Committee of Public Safety, and they end up um, realizing how dangerous the Reign of Terror was under him, and execute him as well. So again, you'll need to stop the video at certain points to get this down in slide 9. Stop the video at certain points to get this down in slide 9. And then this is slide 10, the timeline of the French Revolution. And the timeline is again, you're going to drag and drop these into their proper spaces and put the years, the month and the year. So again, the tennis court is what starts this whole thing as they're kicked out of the assembly, the storming of the Bastille, this fear of the fear of being executed, the fear of what's going to happen with Louis, and then the Declaration of the Rights of Man is issued. And the Declaration of Rights of Man is basically stating that what very influenced by the Enlightenment, what are the rights of of of, of man under a new government. It's ropes, like Rousseau said, it's a social contract between the government and its people. These are things that are very near and dear to the French people's heart, and they will continue to be as we go along here. So that's something worth considering. And then um, the women's march, because they were concerned that Louis was going to take over. It was going to counter revolutionary. Once he's forced to live at the palace, they attempt to flee Austria. They are caught. That's the catalyst for he's a traitor. We're going to execute him, and then and then we start executing the under Robespierre anybody else who might be considered um, enemy of the state. That's the Reign of Terror. Marie's executed a little later on, and then Robespierre. Finally, they've had enough of Robespierre being a dictator. They execute him, and this directory, which we'll talk about, takes over as the government. So again, starting from the tennis court oath in June of 1789 to the Bastille Day in July, all the way to the executions of Louis and Marie, and then finally Robespierre, is this period of very tumultuous times in um, in France. Very tumultuous in times in France. So, anyways, this is slide 10. Hopefully, you've gotten a little better picture, a quick picture of what's going on during this time period. You can stop this video at any point in time to get um, things where they need to be. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll put it over here, and then you can stop the video at any point, and then down here to the executions and Napoleon taking power. So you can stop the video at any point in time that you need to get what you need to from the notes. And this is covering slides the rest of slide 6 and 7, and the guillotine and the timeline of the French Revolution.